How should we organize society? What does the best form of government look like? Does it come from the right or does it come from the left? Maybe this left versus right thing never made any sense in the first place. Throughout history, we have experimented with one ism after another in hopes of coming up with a system where people could cooperate and not kill each other. Maybe we've gotten it wrong this whole time. Maybe there's a better way. Welcome to the Deadly Isms. We're taking on a big one right now. We're going to talk about socialism. There's a growing movement in America hoping to resuscitate the reputation of socialism. Leftists from the very young to the almost comically old are telling us that it's an ideology rooted in compassion, inequality, and justice, and not something we should be afraid of.
Democratic socialism means guaranteed economic rights for all Americans.
With the right policies and the right people to implement them, America can finally become a paradise of economic and social justice. It's important to recognize that most advocates of socialism are motivated by compassion, the same compassion we all share for our fellow men and women. Most people prefer wealth to poverty, freedom to slavery, equality to oppression, and peace to war. We just differ on how to get there. Unfortunately, compassion alone isn't enough to solve complex economic and social problems. A socialist economy requires leaders with enough knowledge to direct the activities of millions of citizens, and with the hearts pure enough not to be corrupted by an immense amount of political power. Is such a thing possible? Looking around at socialism as it's practiced in the modern world, it doesn't look good. In modern America, there's a disconnect between what socialists say they want and the kinds of policies they propose to get there. Perhaps the most recent and vivid example of socialism in practice comes from Venezuela, where Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro implemented a socialist economic program that turned one of Latin America's most prosperous countries into a hellhole. Today, even wealthy citizens face the threat of starvation. These guys thought they were smart, but they couldn't know enough to plan the economy effectively. It's just not possible. And they couldn't resist the inevitable corruption that comes with godlike power over the people. But back in this country, socialists remain undeterred. When they say socialism, they're not thinking of Venezuelans dying in the streets. They're thinking of the happy and prosperous people of Denmark and Sweden and Norway. They call it democratic socialism, attempting to distinguish it from the oppressive regimes of the past. There are two problems with this argument. First, these Nordic countries are not actually socialist. Second, socialists oppose the very policies that made Scandinavia so successful. When Bernie Sanders points to Denmark as a shining example of modern socialism that works, he probably doesn't realize that there's almost nothing socialist about that country. They have thriving markets and free trade and relatively light business regulations. The same is true for these other Scandinavian countries, all of which were forced to liberalize their economic policies in the middle of the last century to fight stagnation and poverty. The reason these countries are so successful is that they've embraced the effectiveness of markets and they allow them to work relatively unfettered. And while it is true that they also have generous welfare programs, these are only made possible due to the country's small populations, the immense wealth from their oil reserves, and the strong economies that come from open markets. Notice that these countries have none of the hallmarks of true socialism. The government doesn't fix prices and hasn't seized control of private business. Property is still privately owned, and there is no effort to restrict foreign trade or transition towards all-out communism. So if Scandinavia isn't socialist, what is Bernie Sanders really asking for? Think about some of the things socialists have asked for in the United States. They want a universal healthcare system run by the government, not private providers.
We must provide a healthcare system that provides quality healthcare to every man, woman, and child in this country. That is precisely what Medicare for all is all about.
They want free college education for all.
I believe that today, when we talk about public education, it should include free tuition at public colleges and universities.
Financed and effectively controlled by the government. Bernie wants to reduce foreign trade and international migration, and they want the government to extend its control to banking and farming and even the internet. These certainly don't sound like the proposals of someone looking to imitate Denmark. They do, however, closely resemble the steps taken to bring Venezuela to its knees. In order to protect workers, Hugo Chavez nationalized agriculture, with the result that the country quickly ran out of food. The Venezuelan government runs the healthcare system, which has condemned many citizens to involuntary confinement in hospitals and asylums that have become grisly chambers of horrors. The situation now is desperate. Chavez's successor, Nicolas Maduro, closed the border, preventing people from fleeing the country. Without free markets, there's not enough wealth in Venezuela to pay off its debts or support any kind of welfare programs for the poor. All the government can do is print more money until it becomes so worthless that you need a wheelbarrow full just to buy food. That is, if there were actually food to buy. In order to really understand socialism, you have to go back to the origins. The term socialism was first used by Marx to explain the transition from capitalism to communism. It was never meant to last and was just a stepping stone on the road to a stateless society with no profits and no prices and no property. Socialism helped accomplish this by allowing the government to seize control of land and factories, set all the prices for goods and services, and kill off anybody who didn't think that was such a good idea. You heard that right. Violence was always an explicit part of Marx's plan to bring about his communist vision. In fact, there's no other way to do it. Socialism requires that everybody in society get on board. As long as you have moms and pops trying to run private businesses and earn profits, the whole thing falls down. So the original socialists had no choice but to employ violence against dissenters. That's why party disloyalty was such a serious crime in the Soviet Union, and why socialists today favor a closed society where it's difficult to escape. Throughout the 20th century, we saw regime after regime put this theory into practice, as Chairman Mao, Pol Pot, Stalin, and Castro turned their brutal oppression of the citizens into the pursuit of the socialist greater good. So if socialism in practice has always been a violent and miserable failure, why are people so eager to support it? What do they know that these socialist revolutionaries didn't? We often hear that the regimes of the past weren't really socialist, and that socialism done right hasn't been tried. Implicit in these claims is the idea that today's politicians, given the same tools as Stalin and Mao, would be able to produce prosperity instead of poverty. If we just put the right people in charge, everything will be fine. But even if you're arrogant enough to think that you're smarter than Castro or Pol Pot, do we really want an economic plan with so narrow a margin of error? When free markets go slightly wrong, you get a slightly less prosperous economy. But when socialism goes slightly wrong, millions of people starve. Is that really a chance we're willing to take? Words change over time. The concise Encyclopedia of Economics defines socialism as a centrally planned economy in which the government controls all means of production. I'm pretty sure that's not what young people mean when they use the word. As near as I can work out, socialism today just means working together to solve problems, and there's nothing wrong with that. Cooperation and community have always been cornerstones of society, and dare I say it, liberty. But it's important to be honest about the lessons of history. Socialist policies, however good they sound on paper, don't lead to happiness or prosperity. They lead to starvation, poverty, misery, and oppression. We can have an open conversation about which direction we think our country should go. We owe it to each other to do just that. But we have to be clear about the words we use and what we actually mean when we talk about socialism. If the word still means what it always has, surrendering our freedom to a supposedly all-knowing, all-benevolent government and expecting it to take care of us, then we should know that going in and not be surprised when the results aren't quite the utopia we were promised.